today, as the title of our conference suggests, we have to consider the environment we're now operating in almost 12 months on since the coalition came to power. But one thing remains certain: housing continues to be at the top of both the media and political agendas in this country. The government's recognition of the scale of the problem we face was reflected in many of the measures that were announced in the budget last week, and we welcome those measures. In particular, the introduction of the First Buy scheme to help first-time buyers, commitments to reduce regulation, the confirmation of the presumption in favour of sustainable development, announcements today that are coming on Build Now, Pay Later schemes, and some practical changes to the definition of zero carbon, all of which are items that HBF has been lobbying for, in some cases over many years, and all of which were contained in the submission we sent to Treasury of our list of wishes to see in the budget. But we must be clear, I think, that these items alone will not solve the housing crisis in this country.
There's a common misconception that localism is the enemy of growth. In truth, it's quite the opposite. A high-handed approach to development is a recipe for unhappiness. Look at the anger and resistance to the regional spatial strategies. Look at the results. Take it or leave it doesn't build any houses. Localism isn't just a transfer of power, it's also a transfer of responsibility and a transfer of consequences for people running away from decisions. Some local decision makers saw national targets as an excuse to wash their hands, to avoid difficult debate. The result, too many places, planning decisions were simply decided on the basis of appeal. We are aiming to condense over 100 pieces of separate planning policy, guidance, circulars, into a single, clear, easy-to-understand document, a new national planning framework. Councils should not, of course, compromise in the essentials necessary to make a development acceptable to local communities. But I'm calling on them to review arrangements to get developments moving again and quickly. So we're asking you to work in a slightly different way than in recent years, relying not on the willingness of your lawyers, but on the strength of your relationship with local communities. But at heart, your job is the same as it ever was. Building not just houses, but places people are proud to call home. Turning great ideas on paper to bricks and mortar. It's an awesome responsibility, but I feel confident that you're up to the challenge. Thank you.
Because I don't believe he actually said in truth anything that's very different to what government has been saying for the last few months in terms of the localism agenda. They clearly see the abolition of regional strategies as very important. They see that as having been a barrier to housing delivery. I must admit, I don't see that. I see council offices and committee rooms making planning applications. They've been the barriers, together with the economic environment over the last few years. So that's where I take a different approach to the Secretary of State.
Well, planning is going to be an ongoing issue in our industry, but we, the major house builders, and other house builders in the industry today, have plenty of land on which we can build houses. We've been prevented from building houses because we cannot find customers. That's the problem today.
Yes, localism sounds very good, the rhetoric is good, but I still really didn't take away from what he said, how it's going to work.
CBI supports the emphasis on local people making local decisions. And in recent years, industry across the board has become ever better at increasing levels of community consultation. But surely there's an essential requirement for policies to set out a clear path and ensure the backdrop to discussions at local level must be the need for economic growth. Every time I hear Eric's narrative of the advantage of a bottom-up, locally driven housing strategy, I can see the strength of his argument. But I'm sure he will have left this conference frustrated that the message from business is one of sceptical response. But your reaction is very much the reaction of the wider business community. It's not obvious to us that he can change culture in the way that he wants. The new homes bonus is a really interesting idea. I can see it working in Doncaster, but will it work in Dorking? But whilst the jury is undoubtedly out on localism, the CBI's job, the HBF's job, is to focus on the here and now. Whether or not the government's reforms make a positive difference or a negative difference in time, there is a significant risk that whilst this industry and councils and their communities get to grips with the new planning regime, that we simply have a hiatus. That in that hiatus, nobody at local level really knows what is going on.
It was interesting to understand house building more in the context of industry in general, and some quite upbeat things there as well. His perspective on the potential government reforms as being positive for the sector. So yeah, very interesting.
We see the CBI as being very good partners to the industry, and we engage with them on an ongoing basis because fundamentally what they recognise is that a good housing market is positive for the economy.
He was portraying a more positive world that we're moving towards in the wider economy, and so yes, I thought that was more upbeat.
What we're seeing is a very painful transition from a period where the cost and availability of mortgage debt may have been unsustainable to something that is more durable. Now, on that transition, we might expect that mortgage lending and transactions in the housing market may fall very sharply. It will be a very painful and difficult transition, but nonetheless, it's a transition. It may last some years, but not some decades. The alternative scenario I want to consider is a worse one, frankly, which is that we're just now stuck in a very bad equilibrium of low confidence, low willingness to lend that may be unwarranted by the underlying risks, and an impaired ability to buy, and that we just can't be confident that these things will self-correct. The evidence is more consistent with the first hypothesis, that we're in a very difficult transition, rather than the second, we're just stuck in a terrible place and it isn't obvious quite what the way out is. It's not clear at all how all this will play out and over what horizon it will play out. And as I say, as it does play out, the link between the decisions we make on the Monetary Policy Committee each month on bank rates and its impact on the economy will be changing, and that makes life a little bit challenging. In the mortgage market, it can easily look like we've taken many steps backwards. And I think in many ways that is too pessimistic a view. I believe it's actually the case that we've taken some difficult steps forward.
Professor Miles, even though there were lots and lots of graphs, I could have listened to him for a good half an hour more at least, because he obviously knows his subject exceptionally well.
He's a classic academic. He almost sees what we're going through as being exciting, because for him it's a really interesting part of the marketplace. I was encouraged that his view on life is just maybe a made to transition, and that we may be going something that feels terrible today, but we may actually find that moderates back in time. And we're already seeing, to be fair, a little bit more competition in the mortgage market, which might just give us a sign that in 3 or 4 years' time, mortgage banks may be back lending to first-time buyers.
In conjunction with announcements coming out of government in terms of the need to kickstart the economy, and that house building can be at the core of that, I think generally over the last, not only in this conference, but announcements over the last couple of weeks, I think generally they make me more optimistic for the future.